Hello everyone, Richard Carlton. Welcome to another awesome day of FileMaker training. So TK55678. So if we actually have a legit problem, someone needs to summarize it for me because I'm doing a broadcast and I can't triage through everyone having a joke on the Discord. So we are broadcasting in high definition to Twitch, YouTube, and Discord. If you have an issue, there's a 50-50 chance it's me and a 50-50 chance it's you. So definitely let us know if we have a problem. Upcoming broadcast schedule, very exciting. We have all sorts of exciting things going on. This is the extended schedule right here. You can see the next 6 days if you go to fmtraining.tv and press the live button. I can do that for you. But the next 3 days are going to be server days. So for those of you who are tuning in expecting to see different content, I do apologize, but given the things that were going on and Claire's kind of asking us to promote certain things, we are going to spend 3 days in promoting the new server release and having a conversation about that. So today is a conversation mostly about the overall release. And then tomorrow is a kind of a Q&A and cleanup, and then Wednesday is the Linux install. So we're going to be doing that. So to keep me out of trouble today with some adult supervision, we are going to, so today's broadcast, we are broadcasting on day 1 of 3. I've got Jacob Taylor, Dr. Taylor today. Jacob Taylor, are you there?
I am there.
Awesome. So Jacob Taylor is going to be here keeping me out of trouble as we go through the new updated server release information. So this is my very fancy PowerPoint that doesn't look very professional, but you can help fill in the dots if you want it to be more professional. You can always volunteer your services to make it better with us. That's great. Once again, welcome everyone who's here. Canberra, Dave Learning, Dave Angel, Ed Burkle, Bob, Foxy Jack, German 71. It looks like German, but you have to look at it very carefully. It looks like Garmin 71. That's kind of, but it's not Garmin like G-A-R-M-I-N. That's a GPS instrument company. You got Gadidi, Jake Sheely, Jericho 1, John Haggard, who I've been talking to for like an hour and a half. Ken Tooley, Net Lobster, Ellen, he does great paintings. In fact, we have to do, she did a painting of us doing a Dead Bird Friday, so we'll have to bring that back. That's funny. You folks will want to see that. Obviously, Scott Kane, Scott Henderson, the Afferlund is back. I tried to ask Afferlund a question, and that didn't go so good, so I need to just try to ask him a question, see how he's doing. And then, of course, we have Trixie, and then at some point when Bunny shows up, if Bunny makes it, reminder, we do have some new people here. Bunny and Trixie are brand new people, so we try to teach them about the FileMaker platform as we go. If you want to ask a question in Twitch, definitely write it up there or in YouTube, and Michael Gravel from Montreal is already in YouTube. A number of you are lurking, especially in YouTube and Twitch. Feel free to let us know where you're from, what city and country you're from. That would be great. We always like to know the breadth of everything that's going on. So up front, today's broadcast. So real quick, who is RCC? This is kind of a PowerPoint presentation today, but there's a lot of technical meat in this presentation. I think you're going to like it. We've been doing this for a lot of years. In May, it'll be 31 years, long time. We have about 35 engineers, mostly based, I would say, about half of them based in California, the other half are based spread throughout the United States. And we also have one gentleman in Mexico City. Today's broadcast, let's talk about skill set levels. So where are you? Everyone here is somewhere on this chart right here. You are a business or manager and you're not super technical, but you want to know about the FileMaker platform, or you're a brand new person. I would kind of consider the Bunny Trixie people loosely in this group right here. Then, of course, if you're an intermediate developer right here, that's going to be the people who, they're not beginners, but they're really not super ninja certified kind of people. There are some people who are ninja kind of people, the Kyles, the TKs, you know, a bunch of you are this way, and I don't even want to offend anyone by not mentioning your name. I can just, Andre, right, another by the NJ from Australia, right? A bunch of you are very, very senior people, different levels of skill sets, but generally you fall into this class group over here. So what is webinar for today? Largely, it's we want the junior developers to grasp the concepts. If you're an intermediate developer, you definitely need to learn this material. But the junior developers kind of start grasping the concepts and 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 if you have questions, ask it. I'm not seeing all the questions over here, Jacob Taylor. So if you see the Discord questions popping up, feel free to let me know. Got Michael from Ireland. Welcome, Michael, as well. Brudderman's there, awesome, as well. Brudderman's kind of a more seniory kind of person. And then, of course, if you're a business owner or manager, really, you just kind of need to loosely know how FileMaker is going to benefit, help you make more money or be more efficient in your business. If you're a senior developer, one of these people we talk about, the material in here you basically need to commit to memory. Okay, if I was a senior developer and you work for me, I would expect you to be largely able to recite most of this or know about it, so you could articulate it in a coherent way. Not necessarily every little technical detail, but understand what's relevant about this release, right? And so the agenda today, we're talking about FileMaker, basically the server, Mac, and kind of to a degree Linux version. Linux, more of a conversation tomorrow, and definitely on Wednesday. We're doing an install on the Linux version on Wednesday. So 3 days of FileMaker Server goodness. And today is kind of conversation about what they did to the entire platform. Why it was important, where it fits in the scheme of things. Tomorrow's kind of a Q&A along with some random stuff. Jacob Taylor is going to be helping with all these days, but as the days progress, he's more and more the star of the show. And then I'm just there to throw darts at him and to ask him questions. Because I'm not a Linux guy, so Jacob's going to do the Linux conversation and go down that road. So really, really, really important. And this is, I think the senior people should know this. If they don't, you're probably not a senior person. The junior people, here's a big tip. So we spend a lot of time talking about lean design or how to build things that are performant, that have good performance. You cannot spend enough money with hardware and better servers to compensate for a bad database design. If you did we do an error right here? Oh, that's right. Thank you for that. How about I change that real quick? Thank you. Nice edit. Right job. I love it. So the new release today is the server 19.1.2, right? That's the new release of the FileMaker server. The server, just so you know, the servers and the copies of Pro are not being synced up in version numbers. Okay, just so you understand, they're not, because the version of Pro now is 19.1.3. I believe. And so Pro is 19.1.3, server is 19.1.2, and that'll change again in a couple months. So Claris is starting to iterate and release these products on a more quarterly schedule. Although this last one, the timeline from 19.1.2 to 19.1.3 on Pro on the client was a month maybe, Jacob? I mean, it wasn't very long, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Jacob, yeah, we got the yeah in there. Right on. So, yeah.
Well, they shipped it to fix I think it was mainly for that issue that they had with 19.1.2, Pro 19.1.2, where it couldn't touch Cloud 1.
Yeah. Well, no, not just that. They also had it where it was if you created a DDR if you're using Pro, not server, but FileMaker Pro 19.1.0 or 19.1.2, the older ones, and you have under weird conditions with a sub-summary field on a layout with or whatever, you run a DDR, you're going to get, and then you run a recovery on it, you're going to get data back saying your file is destroyed and is trashed. And we haven't really talked about too much because it's kind of, I don't want to say an edge case, but you have to run a lot of DDRs, you would notice it, and then you'd freak out. And we've talked about recovering files and things like that. And Claris came out and said, hey, this where it's telling you the file's corrupted and don't use that copy at all. Well, basically it's a situation where it was a bad indicator, right? Now I hear cats destroying shit, so cat control to the bridge, please. So they're literally knocking food off the counter. So that's what you get with rescue cats. So the point is that the DDRs would cause it to, you get to report of a corrupted file when it wasn't corrupted. So 19.1.3 fixes that. Plus allows you to still connect to Cloud 1, whatever. So a lot of stuff going on with that. So today's 3 days of server stuff. So moving along, once again, you cannot buy your way out of a bad server. You cannot spend enough money unless you have a server with spinning drives on it, not solid state drives. If you go to solid state drives, you will see probably a double or triple in like 200 or 300% performance improvement. Most people don't have a server this old with this kind of old technology on it. I haven't had a server like that in probably 7, 8, 10 years. And so the idea is that you cannot get away from lean design. Lean design is the number one thing. That being said, we still need FileMaker Server. We want, basically in an ideal world, when we do FileMaker Server, we want to take our file, we want to give it to server. We want server to share it, back it up, protect it, not damage it, keep it in great shape, and protect it at all costs from bad outside influences, right? And so you want to, like, it's like giving your kids, if you have a child, to the babysitter. When you come back, the babysitter hasn't, you know, throwing your kid out in the street and got your kid run over, right? I mean, you want the FileMaker Server to take care of it like it's their own child, right? And so that's not always been historically the way FileMaker Server has worked. There's been some kind of sketchy stuff, and we're going to talk about that today. There's all sorts of stuff going on in Discord. I can't keep track of it, Jacob. So if you want to, are you taking a look at that? Okay, yes. Yeah, you're responding to it. So if you have a question that you think I should reply to, definitely let me know. That would be great, okay? Is there anything in there I need to answer?
No, someone asked, Dave Learning asked, because he's got FileMaker Pro 19.1.2, and he went and hit his update button, and it told him 19.1.2 was the current version of Pro. It's fully up to date.
I get that myself sometimes, and you just have to go find a clean install, reinstall it. I have no idea why Claris has such a hard time figuring out updates. Half my updates when I want to run them, and everyone swears it doesn't happen to them, but almost half of them say there is no update, and the other half, when I run the update, it crashes FileMaker, and I have to force quit it. And and I don't know why. And everyone says, "Oh, it works just great." So, but I can tell you that it don't work for me, and I've got about
well, and so I can tell you why you're probably not so I can't explain why it crashes, but so for the half of the times where you click the update and it tells you you're fully up to date, even though, right, we're discussing Pro 19.1.3 here, it's really common for software companies to do like a drip rollout. 1% of all requests in a day gets told there's an update, for example. And so then they will take the if they get crash data from those new people, or the updates fail or whatever, they can roll out a V2 of that same patch that fixes some of those issues. I don't know if Claris is doing that, but things like that are really common.
Yeah, I would suspect they're doing that. The problem is that then people really want it. They need to have like I know it's there, go get it for me. Because otherwise Ken or some of you folks here are going to be like, hey, Richard doesn't know what he's talking about. There's no update. So anyway, that's into that side. So today's conversation is not about FileMaker Cloud, right? We're not talking about cloud generally at all. What we are talking about is FileMaker Server. FileMaker Server really comes in two flavors. It comes in a flavor where your FileMaker Server is in your office, and then in most situations it's shared out to the internet, right? And to people who are out of the field. Now, it doesn't have to be shared. This little dotted line is your magical firewall. That firewall may or may not let the FileMaker traffic out. That's up to the people who configure your network and your FileMaker Server person. Just understand that's one of the possibilities where the FileMaker Server is actually up in the cloud. This is where we take FileMaker Server and we put it on Amazon. We do this. It's probably our #1 deployed. This is like our #1 setup right here. We use this far more than anything else. We put FileMaker Server on an Amazon server. So FileMaker is in the cloud, but it doesn't have the word cloud in it, right? Because FileMaker, if you use FileMaker Cloud, that's where FileMaker takes their FileMaker Server and they wrap it into a service and they abstract that from you. Makes sense? So your FileMaker Server, Amazon, and it's focus of really what we're talking about a lot today. So then you are going to the office accesses it from the cloud as well as everyone else does too. So up front, talk about compatibility. So FileMaker Server 19.1.2. Works on the 2 latest versions of the Mac operating system, and then it's working on the Windows Server 2016. And I guess there is a data center. It's compatible, but Claris hasn't fully tested it, right? And then on Linux, you're looking at CentOS 7.8. I think Jacob will probably talk a little bit about this in flight, probably tomorrow and or Wednesday. That's when we're going to really talk about the Linux stuff. But let's cover a little bit about why is there Linux here? Why do we care? What is Linux and why do we care, right? And so up front, if you have FileMaker Server, and you've heard about the Linux one before this last week, it was what they call preview release. That's Claris's way of saying it's beta, and don't yell at us if it melts and blows up. So then people were playing with these beta versions. They don't call it beta, they call it preview. And so the idea is that theoretically you can save a lot of money with your FileMaker server if you're running it on Linux. Why? Because there's no charge for Linux. Linux is an open source operating system. Windows is Microsoft. They want their money. Now, on a small server, Jacob, this is where you come in. On a small server with 5 or 10 people, it's not really an issue. Where does the price become noticeable in the performance with Linux? Where do you get ahead with that?
So basically about the same size as our main database server. So when you guys are looking at basically over 20, 25 users for a server, we have like on our Amazon for our main database server, we have it's called a T3X large. That is still a dual core, but it's on the beefy end. As you go past that, if you start talking about a quad core or more, frankly, part of your fee is you're getting eaten alive by Microsoft licensing costs. The prices for the next tiers past that for Windows servers specifically on Amazon, they jump really fast. Actually, you go up $200 a month, and then you're already talking into $400 and $500 pretty quick. And the Linux ones don't actually jump up quite that fast. And basically the difference between the two is that with something like CentOS or Ubuntu or any of these other ones, there aren't per core licensing costs like there are with Windows, and so you just pay for the horsepower. There's no other, it's an integrated cost from your perspective on the bill, but there's a sub-component of that is the Microsoft Windows licensing, and it's wonderful that that's automatically built in and we don't have to think about it, but it will eat you alive at larger sizes. So.
Yeah, and RC's kind of right on the edge of that. We probably could bump up to a 4-core, and then we're on Windows, and then in that case, the Windows server would be much more than the Linux server. So anyway, so there you go. So that's the end of it. So that's why Linux matters. Why does it matter? Why do we care? Linux matters. That's why. So now, here's the $1 million question. One of $2 million, $3 million questions. Should I use FileMaker Server for Linux? Okay, well, who is maintaining your server, and do they know what Linux is? If the answer is no, then the answer is no. If the answer is yes, then maybe, right? Here's the part down here, right? In TK. Yeah, I know. I love the Penguins. I am the biggest fan of the Penguins. You're going to use the version of FileMaker Server for which your IT folks are prepared to support. If they happen to be a Mac shop legitimately, then you need to be figuring out how you're going to do that on a Mac server, right? But most shops, they have a bunch of IT guys sit around, and what is the line they always say? Oh, no one was ever fired for recommending a Microsoft solution, right? And you'll hear them say that. And so there's always this in-house ability to support Windows. If you have a better technical team, they won't be able to support just Windows. They'll be able to support Linux, so they'll give you the choice, right? But you really need to find out, like if you call on a Saturday night at 2 in the morning because the server's down, is there going to be a Windows guy available or a Linux guy available? Is it equal, right? I mean, or you're that person. If you're that person, then you automatically know. Now, if you want to learn Linux, fine, whatever. That's a different conversation. But we're talking about people like myself. I'm not going to learn Linux. I don't have time to learn Linux. I'm learning other stuff. I don't want to learn this. So can my IT team support Linux? Turns out that they do, and they actually kind of like it, which is cool. So then I have a choice. I can go Mac or Windows or Linux. If you want help with Linux, Jacob Taylor, the guy on the call here, the guy in the doctor's outfit with a little stethoscope, he's the guy who can help you with that. He can do it pretty damn quick. So moving along. So let's talk about this new release. And do we have any... Net Lobster says that penguins are cute and should be the basis of selecting your server. So you should use the cutest penguin to select your server. Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about what the release was about, right? So when they say the release, they made these changes in the Mac one, Mac version, the Mac one. The Windows one, the Windows release, the Mac release, and the Linux release, all three are kind of in parity. And so people say, well, which one's faster? Wim DeCourt, and this is a shout out to him, he focuses, where we're doing live streams every day, he focuses really on tearing server apart and like really fine tuning and testing. He's got a tool called Punisher, which is similar to what what Nicholas Lightbody did in the UK. In fact, I wasn't sure why both of them were doing the same thing, but basically they built a performance testing tool that what they do is it tests the FileMaker server with a bunch of PSOS clients. Now PSOS, or if you got, it happened last week, we were talking about it. It was, you wanted to know what pimp sauce was because Nick was mispronouncing it, but it's PSOS, not pimp sauce. What is a PSOS client? It's when you tell the FileMaker server to run a script. FileMaker server invisibly will fire up its own, basically a copy of FileMaker Pro, and that copy of FileMaker Pro, which is sitting on the same machine next to FileMaker server, right, will run a script for you and do some work for you. It's very high speed, high performance. Well, the FileMaker server is kind of basically one process or thread on this machine, and you could have a whole bunch of FileMaker Pros invisible fire up, 20, 30, 50, 100 of them. It allows you to beat on the server to test and to get kind of good benchmarks. So that's what Wim is working on. And the short version of what he, if you look at the performance charting, is that the Linux version and the Windows version are pretty much a wash in terms of overall performance. Based on the charts and the data that I've seen, on some obscure things, Windows can be 5 or 10% faster than Linux, and then on other things, Linux will be 5 or 10% faster. So really, there's no performance improvement to using Linux. And some of you are like, why? Well, I don't know why. It's not way beyond the purview of this conversation. I can simply tell you that if you're going to go down the road of Linux, it's not a performance conversation. It's a, do I have support for a conversation? And in fact, that's the only conversation. Wouldn't you say, Jacob, that's the number one thing? Do you have support for it? And if you have support for it and you need a big enough installation, you could save money, right?
Yep. It's probably primarily going to be a support question, though. You do save money, and the money adds up quickly, but realistically, like, unless you're talking fleets of FileMaker servers because you have every app and you spread stuff out and you're a giant Fortune 500 or something, something like that, where the dollars really multiply and they do add up rather quickly, then it might be a cost thing, but you'll probably hire people in that situation to support your Linux FileMaker server. So
Yep. NetLobster says, I remember doing Red Hat years ago. Is CentOS the same as Red Hat? I mean, they're both Linux, right?
Yes. To answer NetLobster's question, Red Hat is it's basically the version in the corporate support. You can pay Red Hat, who I think got bought by IBM last year or this year, but you can pay them for support contracts and that sort of thing. And so that's lovely. CentOS basically is the exact same thing, but they've taken all the branding out, and obviously there's no support. So
yeah, so there you go. So CentOS is the free version, yeah, basically. So yeah, so we just kind of answered that. Yeah. So so the conversation going on here. So YouTube questions. Michael from Ireland, obviously, Mike Gravel on YouTube, and there's a whole bunch of lurkers on YouTube and Twitch. So if you have questions, definitely ask. So what we decided to do with this conversation is Claris actually did a release on what we did to it, but they actually wrote a blog, which was pretty interesting. And Jacob and I are going to talk through this blog, and if you have questions along the way, but we're breaking the blog down in sections from top to bottom and putting them in context, and to try to help the conversation. So first off, what I want to say is that a lot of what Claris has been focused on has been, and in fact, you hear about it talking about in this conversation. If you have like 5 people on a tiny Windows server and 5 people on a tiny Linux server, the costs are pretty similar, right? But as you start to get a bigger server with more users, then Linux becomes more attractive because of the licensing. There's no licensing for Linux, right? But Microsoft wants their pound of flesh for using Windows, right? And so that starts to become a thing. And so Claris in this entire conversation has been looking at scalability, okay? Now, it's not up here anywhere, but really it's performance slash scalability, right? Because what they've gone after and done, starting with the release of FileMaker 8, was it 18 where they turned it? It was 18, right? Was that where they
PLL.
first the PLL? So Claris came out with a product. I'm going to go ahead and roll to the next slide. It was page level locking, startup restorations, 2 technologies that came together. We called it Pulsar. If you watch any of our paid training videos, which we really appreciate you doing, if you go to FMtrain.tv, watch our paid content. we talk about Pulsar at a very great level. We, myself, I know Wim at Soliant, a lot of big companies looked at the way that, frankly, that Claris was communicating on Pulsar prior to the ship of 18. But a lot of us, including Wim, explicitly withheld support for certain features in 18. We would say, turn on, get server 18, but turn off the page level locking startup restoration. What Claris did is this Pulsar capability is designed to really help people deployments where you have at least 25 people or more. Really, it was it's this kind of moving number, but somewhere where you have a bunch of people hitting one server, we need better performance. We want more, so support more people with the same level of hardware. And once again, the way you normally would do that is with better database design. But remember, Claris is held hostage by all of us as developers. Some of us build the design. Most of you here that are on the Discord side, I know, and probably Michael Gravel, and probably Michael in Ireland too. Building lean design, you know what it is, you know you should be doing it. That's the number one thing that helps you build scalable files. But Claris has to deal with a bunch of people who are goofballs, and they just throw stuff together, and then they never rebuild it for performance. It's just like always going to be unstored calculations and summary fields. And so Claris was trying to make the tool work better for people who don't watch us and don't go through lean design. Never mind, that's the number one thing you can do. And so it took about 6 months for this to really come out and be seen, because initially 18 came out, people didn't see it, and then it was turned on. We were telling people to turn this off. It's a checkbox. You could go on the command line and turn this thing off. So Claris then realized, after trying to fix it and trying to fix it and trying to fix it, that the fundamentals of what they were trying to do were too difficult for them to pull off. Why it was too difficult, we don't know, but I know, having conversation with them, that they were trying to fix it. They were literally beating their head against the wall. So they said, we're just going to abort on this, and we're going to come up with some other technology to give us the performance boost we need. So we need a performance boost. So what Claris has done, you can read through this, but the short version is it was causing problems. And so what they've done is they've done other things that bring us a similar level of performance, once again, for this larger group of users. And this is where Jacob Taylor kind of comes in the conversation more, because they talk about these improvements. So one of the things they're doing is talking about scheduling a script to purge a temporary database file. So Jacob, what is this all about?
So one of the issues people have run into, and I don't know, I can't tell you if this is a new or an old issue, but there is an old issue that's the exact same thing. So one of the issues that we used to run into with FileMaker servers, especially on-site ones, but for those of you watching who are familiar with how we build our Amazon servers, we usually make like the boot hard drive pretty small, and that's because we put the databases somewhere else. But for example, if you can think, if you have users and what you guys do is a lot of document management, or perhaps you're storing a lot of photos in your FileMaker database, those have temp files, right? While it's uploading to the server, while that's in process, the upload's happening, but it hasn't stuck in the database record yet. That produced as a temp file on the server, and so it's gotten better recently, but historically, FileMaker Server hasn't always been the best about cleaning those up when the upload finishes, for whatever reason, I don't know. And so one of the things people would run into is their C drive would fill from these temp files, and that makes at least Windows angry, and definitely FileMaker Server angry, and they'll shut down or crash or do silly things that you don't want while your database is running. And so they made some improvements on that. For example, FileMaker Server version 18 will emergency, if you've ever noticed this will be why. FileMaker Server version 18, and it was a change from 17, would emergency close your databases on you if your boot drive got to a gig of space free or less. Like if it went under a gig of free space, it would just emergency close your databases. That caught a couple of our customers off guard, because they're like, well, I have free space on my drive, and I go and look at their hard drive and there's 870 megabytes or something. It's like, well, that's technically true, yeah. but basically FileMaker Server panicked and tried to save your databases, and was successful actually, but right, like it boots everybody.
Right.
So what this thing does is it averts or it's another tool in our toolkit to avert issues like that, where they're doing some interesting caching systems with databases, with changes that are happening that are in process but not actually in your database just yet. Like, it's not quite put in there. And so a lot of times they'll cache that in some kind of a temporary file. If those aren't cleaned up perfectly and your FileMaker server just runs without issue for months on end, or even weeks if you do lots of stuff in FileMaker, then you can end up with a full boot drive, and then your server falls over, and that's not good. And so what they've introduced is a scheduled script that's built into the FileMaker server software to clean out some of those temp files automatically. And you've got to go set, as it says on Richard's thing here, you have to go set the script up and install it in your server and whatever. But they're giving us additional tools to kind of avert those issues.
Yeah, one of the things that comes up with this is understanding what the temporary files are used for. So temporary files can be on your client. That's where, and that's a separate conversation. We'll get into that in a little bit. But these are temporary files that the server is opening for the database itself. And so what's happening is that as you're interacting and writing data to it and doing a bunch of stuff, basically imagine if it peels off a copy of you. Say you have a contacts file, and it's the holy grail file that's running on the FileMaker server, the thing you don't want corrupted. Well, the temp file is kind of, from our practical layman standpoint, it's a copy of that file. Okay, and it's doing read and write changes to that file in there, those records. And then when it feels like that the communication is good, like the client just doesn't disappear. It used to be you could corrupt the FileMaker file by doing a bunch of changes, then just cutting the client off, because FileMaker was not interacting with a temp file, it was interacting with the actual live file, and then suddenly the client is like, poof, gone. We're talking 15 years ago, kind of how some of the technology worked. And so they realized, well, maybe we should be like writing changes in permanent marker to this one file where something bad could happen in flight. So what they do is they make sure that you get to the point where that the client is fully communicated, you're going to commit the changes, it sees they're committed, then it grabs that data out of the temp file and loads it and saves it in one push, a transactional push, back into the main live file. That's how it keeps the files generally from ever being corrupted or damaged when people get disconnected. So as you're interacting with this temp file, and then it loads and pushes it. Well, clearly somewhere there's been one or more moments where this temporary database file runs out of control, causes problems. This information right here that you see on screen caused a number of internal conversations with some of the very senior developers going, okay, I understand this is a temporary fix. It should be a temporary fix, but if you guys had it together there, we should need to do this. So obviously in a future version, your product will incorporate this automatically. I guess to a degree, maybe. The one thing they talk about this is it's pretty, there's a couple new features here, and they're kind of heavily, when you run them, they could take a lot of processor performance. If you've got a bunch of people, it's a high traffic time, 5 o'clock at night, everyone's trying to go home, they're trying to finish up their work. You don't want this to run at that point. You want it to run at midnight or some off time, right? Important idea there. But of course, they talk about this a little bit. So it's a system script setting that you could play with. Jacob could get into this a little bit tomorrow if we want to talk about this. But this is part of that blog. So we're walking through this blog. And then, of course, they talk about setting your cache size, right? It's always important. They mention this, right? So setting the cache size is, a lot of people leave it as a default setting, but you need to work on adjusting your FileMaker cache so it keeps things in RAM memory as best as possible. I mean, Jacob, you deal with this all the time, right?
Yep. You want so our rule of thumb is I don't want to explain the math equation because I have like a little math equation, but it's basically a little less than half of the available system memory. So for example, if you've got like a Mac Mini in your office that you bought and it's got 8 gigs of RAM, you're going to be setting it to a little less than 4 at 3.5 gigs, something like that. That's a good rule of thumb. You want to think though, because for example, situations where that won't work particularly well, if you have like all of your users are on WebDirect, for example, you want to leave a little more breathing room. Or if you have some nightly processes, for example, we have some customers that have nightly business processes that run at 1 a.m. when nobody's on there, but they chew through like the whole database overnight. You want to again, give a little more breathing room, because you may need more than that other half to accommodate for the operating system, WebDirect, the script process that might be running, and stuff like that. So
we've had conversations about this before, and I'll get 5 or 6 or 8, 10 people here all arguing with me that it's totally wrong and incorrect. And I remember going back and forth. I don't know, it was Jesse Barnum or Nick Orr, and some of you were there, and we were like, oh, well, that formula is not accurate. Well, whatever. Okay. The point is, two things. One is if you're running it, if you do this like a little bit less than 50% thing, and you're running out of RAM somewhere else, you probably have under resourced your server. That's a fancy way of saying put more RAM in the server. The second thing is what Claire says here is that you're kind of, if you're trying to fine tune it, what you're doing is looking at the stats log file to see the cache hit level, and you want that cache hit level to be as close to 100% as possible. And if that means adding more RAM because you've under-resourced it again, then that's important to do. But the thing is, you can't give all the RAM to your computer, because if you have half the RAM that's being taken by your FileMaker database server engine, the web publishing and any web other stuff and Apache and IIS and these other services, they're going to take what's left. And if you don't have enough over there for them, that's where you run into this contention, right? This resource, basically fighting resources for not enough memory. This is the next one, and you were talking about this one yesterday or Friday, Jacob. Schedule scripts to verify databases. So this is something that some of my engineers have been asking about for a long time, right?
Yep. So yeah, and I one of our senior engineers has kind of built a manual process that does something very similar. So that's why I reached out to him immediately as soon as I saw this change in there, because this is something he's been asking for a very, very, very long time. And so as you can tell, if you read the steps that it does, it is disruptive actually. It boots all your users, closes all your databases, runs a verify, like a consistency check on all of them, and then, assuming they pass, I suppose, brings them all back online again. And he had built a manual process for this some years ago, because he likes to do that for a couple particular customers of his that have had issues in the past. So it's nice to see that we have a kind of an automated way to do that, but as it notes, be careful and do know that, you know, if you set this thing up and run it overnight, it will boot everybody. It's going to close all your databases down. So if you're driving websites out of your FileMaker database or something like that, you know, if this is important to you, obviously do it, but just know that there are implications to that. So
okay, yeah, and so once again, and I think this is partly came about because Claris, with the 18 release and prior to 19, Claris tech support has been dealing with a lot of pissed off people who had the PLL, that page level locking startup restoration, that first attempt, which has now been removed. It's not even in the product anymore, right? Basically. They were dealing with a lot of people where that technology, what it would do is if you used it for enough time, your servers would start slowing down. You don't know why everything's going slower. It's not just the internet. People always say the internet's full, right? Okay, well, your internet connection is not overtaxed. And so that's one of the indicators that page level locking startup restoration are having a problem on your machine. And it's even worse in the event that they damage the file. So this is one of the things they wanted to be able to do to check to make sure the files were okay. Having this in their product just as a kind of a person that I am makes me nervous fundamentally. Not that we don't have it, but the fact that it's needed in the first place at all. Because once again, we talked about to me, what is FileMaker Server? It's the babysitter that takes care of your child when you're not there supervising, right? And you don't want the babysitter to cause damage to your file behind your back, right? You're trusting it to take good care of it. Kind of an important thing. So when I saw this, I went, damn. Right? Because obviously it's so, because Claris always likes to say, if you ever ask a company, it's like if you ask Toyota, you know, hey, is there any problem with your cars? Like, our cars are perfect in every way, and no one's ever been killed in one of our cars because they're so amazing, right? And you know it's a lie, right? But that's what they say, right? And so then you have a recall on fuel pumps. Like, I had all the fuel pumps on all these Toyota cars that got pulled, right? And then they're forced to admit to it. So this is like a recall, right? Kind of a little bit, right? So when you see this right here, this is like verifying that that thing that you had before is kind of fixed and there's no lingering problems, right? So once again, their recommendation is, if you read the words here, at least once per day. That's what the last one said too. If you go back up here, it says at least once per day. So you got this one, and you got this one down here saying at least once per day. So it's not like we loosely recommend it. When they say at least once per day, that's like pretty like do it now or we're going to beat you with a stick. Okay, there's a conversation going about Windows costs, stuff like that, which is fine. For those of you wondering about this, with Windows, with AWS, you don't get a Windows bill. There is no Windows bill. AWS has some big contract with Microsoft, and so as they rent out servers, they actually rent them out in milliseconds, literally. It's not, you see them in hours and days, things like that. We don't, us humans here, we don't deal with milliseconds very well, but the computers deal in milliseconds. They actually sell stuff on millisecond slices, and so there's so much of that money goes to Microsoft, so you never see it. But what you do is you just compare the prices on the two servers, and you'll see the Microsoft price is kind of like, kind of edging up on the chart, like that way. So as the more users go, your Linux hardware goes this way, but your Microsoft's going up because there's a Microsoft license fee in there. So that's what's going on with that.
Yeah. And if you want an example of that, so the costs, this is for the same machine that we have for DBW4. This is just the horsepower part of it, just the brain and the memory,
okay.
Not the hard drives. So the Linux on-demand cost is about $121.50 per month.
121 US dollars per month. Okay. Yep.
Yep. And the Windows on-demand cost is $175.
So $50 more per month for kind of a medium. I would say a low to medium sized server, right? So it depends. Depends on what to you is low and medium, but yeah.
So that's it's a quad core with 16 gigs of RAM.
Is that what ours is a quad core with 16 gigs of RAM?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Okay, cool.
So, and that's the price difference between the two. If you do a reservation, which we recommend generally,
Yes.
just because it's free money being saved, your Linux reserved cost is going to be about $76 a month. Your Windows reserved cost is going to be just under $130.
Okay, so still like $50 more.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So so the money savings there is on the hardware side. It's not there's no discount on the licensing side. That's interesting.
Correct.
That's interesting. Yep. Okay, good. Well, there you go. That's why you might want Linux, right? So there you go. So there's more configuration information here about these two things, but once again, we're talking about the scheduled script to verify all databases, and then you have the scheduled script to purge to temporary. These are the two new things that are really turned on, right? And so this is all under the stability and reliability improvements, right? And then you come down here, one more right here. For those of you who are legitimate Linux type people, I saw this and it was like didn't register with me because I'm not a USR1 signal. I don't know what that meant. But if you're a Linux person, apparently, when would you use this command in Linux, Jacob? I mean, I guess it's
so. In general, the user one signal, it's generic, but what most people do, what most software authors do with that command is some sort of a live reload type thing. For most Linux applications that I interact with, I run my own server outside of RCC, and that's usually what that command usually means is you have a configuration file for the app, reload it, and make that real, whatever. Like,
so like almost like
almost
like quit the app, reboot it, and reread out of the configuration file. Is that
correct? But without actually rebooting the application, they can do it while they can make that change while it's running. So but still, this would be the right way to do that because we don't know what any of the other signals are for FileMaker Server. So user-defined signal number one makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. So they have that one on Mac, which is basically Linux or Unix, and Linux, which are kind of very similar. If you run this command, FileMaker is going to properly shut down the FileMaker files. For whatever reason, they're not going to support that on Windows. I don't know. There's some sort of security issue with that. They got into.
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead, Jacob.
I'm stoked about that because I've been pestering them for like a year for that.
Okay. So if you're a Linux person, then that makes sense to you. So once again, okay. So stability and reliability improvements, fix stability issues with progressive backups and full backups. So a couple terminology issues here, which are nice. So a live lock is, I guess, an issue where you have a slow operation resulting in stale backups, right? And then a deadlock, backups not running at all. I actually would run into live locks all the time with certain configs of Mac. Mac Minis, high performance Mac Minis with lots of solid state drives, and NVMe drives, which is even a SSD. SSD is a very loose term, but then there's this NVMe, November Victor Mike Echo NVMe, and it's more of like a chip, small chip, and it really can be high speed. It's the latest greatest if you're buying a laptop or something like that. So anyway, the idea was that we were having backups where they would slow to a crawl, so slow that it felt like they weren't running at all, but they hadn't really crashed. And so we've run into that before. So apparently they fixed some issues on this theoretically. So I would be able to install this on my Mac, and maybe that problem would go away. I ended up having a couple drives that I ended up removing some of the backup schedules so they wouldn't ever run into each other and cause this issue. So once again, this is how FileMaker or Claris is setting the priority within their application, how they set the priority to on the when you're scheduling things and you run backups relative to a user connecting and doing stuff, they have to prioritize that stuff, and they've changed the priority of how that stuff works. So back to sharing lock. What is a sharing lock, Jacob Taylor?
So my understanding of this is basically what they've done is they've split out. So you're trying to read. You've got two concepts for a database. You want to read data from the database, or you want to write data from a database. Maybe for the table or what, you could get finer grained about it. But I'm just going to talk about it generically. So what they've done is they've kind of split that out. So there's now. From their details here, what it looks like is they maintain what they're calling the mutex, which is it's an exclusive lock. So one person can be writing, say, to a table at a time. That's it. And you guys know that you guys know, you go to enter into a record and it pops up and says, hey, Jane is, editing this record, like, send them a message to get out or whatever. That has not changed in this at all. What my understanding of this is what has changed is when you are trying to purely read data from a table, more than one client, person, whatever, can do that at the same time now. And that's because, you could just do that, but it previously wasn't, the database engine was not built that way. And so you have to, if you build it way back when, they apparently they had a mutex, and basically anyone reading or writing had to wait for the previous read or write to complete.
Yeah.
And so now multiple reads can happen at the same time, concurrently, simultaneously.
Yeah, so you'll see them refer to this as multiple searches or finds going off at the same time, and they can run in parallel. Once again, the performance improvements here, once again, page level locking, which is kind of was there, and then they pulled it out because they really couldn't make it behave well without damaging files. This is an improved process, very low risk because we're not talking about writing data. What this is primarily about is performing speed improvements, but for the server doing parallel tasks with multiple people. One person's not going to see the performance improvement, but if you had 10 people doing the legitimately same search on the same table at the same time, then when you had that group of people hitting it like that, then you're going to see a performance improvement. And I would just tell you that I'd be shocked if you saw this in a day-to-day activity if you had less than 20 or 25 people. Because what are the odds if you have 25 workers working in the database loosely within your organization? If you got 25 people that are just like telephone operators processing orders, and they're all doing the same job, yeah, maybe they would run into each other, but most organizations have 20 or 25 people kind of a little bit doing different jobs. A couple people doing this job, a couple people doing another different job, a couple bosses, managers, right, a couple people in the warehouse, whatever, and they're doing different jobs, and they really don't run into each other. But so once again, Claris is attacking this issue of scalability. Once again, they didn't use the word scalability here. All the text you see on the screen is their text. But it's important to understand that that's what they were going after. This all started back years ago with page level locking, startup restoration, and going after supporting larger groups of people on one server, right? And so what they've done is by getting rid of PLL and startup restoration and using this other stuff, they're getting to similar levels of improvement, which is the whole goal, right? So moving along, parallel index find operations once again. So that this is because of that previous item. So And then sorting records on host is an interesting conversation, right? So, okay, so a little bit of a conversation going on in Discord about what kind of server should I buy, right? We're back to that. It's always a kind of a loaded question. I'm going to save some of these, like what kind of David, if you're around tomorrow, David Angel. We're going to talk about these kind of questions tomorrow for sure. There's also a couple of questions. Michael Gravel, I have a problem with my FileMaker server. How should we diagnose and chase that down? Really common questions. I want to hit it tomorrow because we're going to run out of time today before we get to the end. I want to close this part of it out. But so the shared lock, so multiple reads in parallel, right? Which leads to parallel indexed find operations, right? Now, the second part of this is sorting records on the host. Something I have literally asked for. I remember having a conversation, and for those of you who've watched us here, you've heard me say this before. We had a conversation with certain senior engineers, of which who are still at the company, and I said, we need the server to optionally be able to run the sort on the server, because it already does the sort on the server if you're WebDirect. Remember, if you're a WebDirect user, right? Think about it. Where's all the activity happening? It's not on your client. Your client's an idiot browser. Where's it happening? It's on the server. The server can already do the sort. I said the server needs to do the sort like it does a find. Most find operations are done on the server, okay? And the sort should be done the same way. They go, well, what happens if too many people activate it? So the word is they had this built for years. This has been in the product for years and never turned on. They were scared to death to turn this on because they'd have a bunch of people who would run the same time. The server goes slow. I said it's real simple. If the server is not busy, right, then run the sort on the server. If you have a bunch of people that are suddenly hitting it and it's doing a backup, the server's pretty busy, someone does a sort, instead of the server doing the sort, it just dumps it down to the client for you, which is slower, dumps it down to the client for you, and you do it yourself. So it slows. So the server keeps running. It doesn't grind to a halt. It dumps, instead of it taking some of the work for you, it's already kind of busy. So instead of it busing, so you're going to a restaurant and you're done with your food, you're sitting in a restaurant and you bus your, some restaurants you could pick up the trays and help them out and put the trays and put the trash up for them and help them bust the table, right? Or is a server going to do it for you? Oh, they're really busy. How about you go do it yourself? It was a time I was at a Mexican restaurant at a Chevy's and they had no customer service at all. The server, they were overwhelmed inside. I went behind the bar and started making drinks, okay? I kid you not. I don't know anything about being bartending. They had a little machine with little buttons on it. I started shooting stuff everywhere and making drinks for people because everyone was wanting drinks. And after I did that for about 10 minutes, and then the manager ran up and wanted to know what the hell was going on. I said, well, I've been here for an hour and I still would like something to drink, so I am behind the bar. You can see me doing this, pressing it's got the little sprayer thing with the little buttons on it. Never worked that before. I was just shooting them all and people were getting random drinks. It was great. So that's where you're helping the server. That's how sort normally works. You help the server by pouring your own drink or taking out your own trash. We're saying for performance, why don't you do it for us if it can? And that's the way it works. Very important concept. So we're going to start to see this. Once again, that's if your server is not terribly busy. Now, some of you go, well, that's really great. This is most important. This is great. And partly it matters and partly it doesn't. And I'll tell you why. Because as you interact with your FileMaker database, FileMaker is going to send the data down to your client. We're talking about FileMaker Pro or Go for the most part right now. It's going to send the data down to your client. Eventually, you're going to get to a spot where you have, say you have 1,000 or 100,000 records in your contact solution, and you'd say you do a sort on it right now with an older version, say the version from 2 weeks ago, or 17 or 18 or something. It's going to send you the data down, and you're going to perform the sort. In the modern versions of FileMaker 19, it keeps the data. Even after you quit FileMaker and reopen it, the data, that 100,000s of records, is still on your computer. And if you do the sort the second time, or you are interacting with that data the second time, it's doing it against the local data on your hard drive. It's not going back to the server. So this operation, to some degree, kicks the can down the road a little bit. It does it for you if it can. If it can't, it's going to send all the data down to you, so you do it. And then if you do the request the second time, the fastest way to do it is to do it against the local data. So it's kind of this moving menagerie. It's mostly for people on their first sort. It'll take care of it for them if they can. Otherwise, it's going to send you all the data down. So that's that. So Questions on that end of things? There's still conversation there. Any questions? Questions at all? Because we're kind of getting to the end here a little bit. I want to make sure we keep going through this. So in our new performance testing, our new performance videos, we talk about two things that drive performance, right? Or things that we're concerned about. Now, lean design addresses all this, but one is waiting for the data to come down from the server, which is what this helps with. If the server does the sort for us and just gives us the order of the records, that's great. But that's waiting for the data to come down so we can do the sort. If we do the sort, it brings the data down. We have it locally. If the data is local and we're still working on the data and processing it or churning it, we're calling that the churn. So you have the data coming down from the server. Eventually, you have almost all the record data and the layout data. And then as you do stuff, you're interacting with it locally. And then only when you're trying to do a lock or a write function, you're saving data to that data, it goes back to the server. So if you bring all the database down, say you sort every record in every table, and you go to every layout, and you have all that data down, you quit FileMaker, you reopen FileMaker, one of the things that your client is going to do with the server is to verify that all your layouts and all your record data is up to date. That's what it's doing. Once you know what's up to date, then as you interact with it, it'll be as fast as possible because you're mostly interacting with it at a local level. Only when you write data, like a replace command or you make an edit, it pushes it back to the server. Otherwise, it's local, it's fast. So as you're chewing through, you're churning, you're mixing it, you're churning that local data. There'll be a performance slowdown if you have to churn a lot of data. That's part of lean design, churning it as fast as possible. Not just waiting it for the server, but for to churn it locally. Very, 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 very important. In fact, a very important concept. It didn't used to be important. Now it's really important because it used to be that when you quit FileMaker, it would just eject all that data and you had to download it again every time. So the focus was on this download of data. Now it preserves it. It preserves the data. FileMaker, all this stuff was released last week. It's all in market right now. So that's for Canberra. Someone asked, Canberra asked, when is it going to be done? So memory-based key comparison during indexing, right? So more fancy McFancy stuff, mostly targeted towards scalability, parallel users together. Jacob Taylor, you have any comment on this one? The memory-based key comparison during indexing?
No, that's just a straightforward speed improvement, I think.
Yeah.
They were doing it in temp files, and somebody went through and looked at all this stuff and went, oh, we shouldn't be doing that in temp files. We should do it in RAM.
In RAM and not so not the live. Remember, we'd already talked about the live file, doing stuff direct in the live file. Not good. So we take a copy of it out, work in the temp file, but that's still in your drive. If you have a really fast drive subsystem, I don't know how much this will help you. If you have a slower drive and really fast RAM memory and a lot of RAM memory, then this will help. Okay, so moving along, making installation easier. Jacob, do you want to comment on this? Do we know enough about this at this point?
I haven't had a chance to test this one yet. That was the one I was making jokes about taking one of our development servers and just kind of running it and see what happens.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how else to test that because you've got to take an 18 or an existing 19 server and just try it and see if it works.
Yeah. So I think in the scheme of things, I think this is less of an issue to me. Either it works or it doesn't, and you're probably going to need a little professional assistance. That's why Jacob's here. Or you can go online and just try it out for yourself. I wanted to ask you about this because this gets back to Jacob Taylor. He gets on my shoulder sometimes and he starts talking tech, and I learn a lot. And this elliptical cartography stuff, right? Elliptical curve, right, Jacob?
Yes.
You want to give us the very short summary of what the hell this is and why do we care?
Just there's not a good layman explanation for it. It's just different.
Because I'm very much a layman. I'm lame as hell. So
okay, no, it's different math. So the encryption that has been historically supported by FileMaker Server is called RSA, and what that fundamentally is if you guys are familiar with prime numbers, you get a really, really, really ridiculously huge couple of them, and that becomes the basis of your math. So if you take two unspeakably large prime numbers and multiply them together, it's really difficult to get to look at that third number, the multiplied one, and figure out the previous two, right? It's like that division is a really difficult problem. So that fundamental problem is what makes that math safe, and how we can encrypt data, and then you can't go back later and decrypt it if you don't have the other part.
Right.
You need
The key.
you need one of the parts. Yeah, you need the public part of it and the private part of it. And so you, as like a FileMaker client, will have the public part of it. That's what comes in like an SSL certificate that you install in a server. But there's always that private key that comes with it. And so if you don't have that private key, you can decrypt it, but you can't go back and or pretend to be or any of that kind of stuff. So what ECC is it's just a different way to do the same thing. It's, as it says, curve in the name, those are elliptic curves. And so what it's based on is the same kind of concept, the rarity, kind of that idea of being, it's rare and difficult to go backwards in direction in the math. With this, it's a, if you know what an elliptic curve is, just you can conceptualize a giant math curve. If you picked a couple spots on that curve and you used the kind of the location as your public and your private piece of information that you're using for this math operation, rather than just a really couple of really giant numbers. It's pretty similar conceptually. There are some benefits to it because it's a point instead of a really giant number. It can be much smaller because you're basically doing coordinates instead of like, again, a prime that's 100 characters long or way bigger, right? You know,
Right.
we're talking a 1024 bits. It's going to be 128 characters, and you're going to be twice that size probably anymore, at least. So. Whereas if you're putting coordinates on some sort of a curve, that can be a much smaller piece of information. It's not any less secure, but it's a much smaller piece of information to communicate, and that makes the certificate smaller. It makes the keys smaller. It makes
so there's your advanced calculus conversation for the day, everyone. For those who are wondering about that, no charge, by the way, because Professor Dr. Taylor is in the job. So there's a way to generate the SSL certificate. If you're interested more about this, you definitely read about it. I don't want to get too deep into this, but they're supporting this. It's good technology to support, and once again, conversations about generating the SSL certificate. So that is the basis of their blog article. Okay. So tomorrow we're going to be doing open Q&A. We've gone through our hour or over a little bit now. We're going to be talking. So we had questions from Michael Gravel. Hey, my server's slow as hell. What do I do? Great question. Then Scott, or who was it? David said, hey, I've got 10 people. What kind of server do I need? And once again, what are those 10 people doing? Are they beating on it? Is it kind of light access? I think there's conversation that need to happen here. Welcome, Trixie. Thank you for being here with us. Appreciate everyone being here. So we'll be back tomorrow for day 2 of the conversation. Tomorrow's an open Q&A for server, so bring your server questions. We'll try to stump Jacob. Jacob, are you ready for that tomorrow?
I will. I mean, good luck stumping me. Although I'm sure if we put the challenge to them, they can probably do it. I'm sure.
I'm sure between TK and Kyle and a couple people,
somebody will come up with a really interesting scenario.
Obscure.
And I'm gonna go, maybe.
Yeah. So we'll be doing that, no problem. And then Wednesday, then is the follow-on day 2, which is our Linux install day end to end. So we're going to go through a FileMaker Linux install. Version 19.1.2. Thank you for the version correction there. I think that was Scott or Canberra. Someone said that to me. So appreciate that. Any other final questions for the day? No, we're good. Agent Chevy is going more RAM, Agent Chevy. More RAM. If any of you are using 8 gigs of RAM, I don't know. I think that's on the low side, just me personally. I don't like servers with that little bit of RAM. Unless you've got like 5 people in a small file. What?
Yeah, we do 4 gig RAM, which is that's what a medium is in Amazon, but only for clients who they never have more than 10 users, and really if they have 10, I'll put them on a large, but if they have 9 users or less and they basically don't use WebDirect, like it's all pro, that can fit on 4 gigs because they're not doing anything. There's no scheduled scripts, like none of that stuff. If you need anything beyond that, you're going to need 8 gigs of RAM. And if you have 20 users or something like that, you want to be talking 16.
Okay. So we'll dive into performance and numbers tomorrow. Once again, Jacob's opinion and my opinion are generally pretty similar, but I always like more RAM because it's stuff's so cheap. Cool. And then once again, we'll be doing the Linux install on Wednesday. And then Nick, for those of you who missed Nick is actually working on paid project work. He's getting paid, and he's learning new stuff, which is great. We had to send Nick back to school. That's great. So, and is there a link to the slides? Well, if these had been Clara's slides, it would be no, you don't get them, because I've been told I can't share their slides. But guess what? These are my slides, so I can give them to you. So there we go, right? So how about I give them to you, Ken Bear, tomorrow? Is that okay? Do you need them today, tomorrow? Is that okay? Sure, great, cool. So we'll give you the slides for this tomorrow. I know it's not a lot of action, but it's a lot of technical stuff, and it's only an hour, right? So, all right, that's it. We should be tomorrow having a conversation to bring your server problems to Dr. Taylor tomorrow. See you, everyone.
We'll run through them.
Guys just stepped up the whole way. Calm, cool, collected the quarterback. Great read, good patience. More importantly, great job up front protecting this quarterback to give you a chance. And that's all you can ask for.
Try to rally down 10. 9:25 to go here in the fourth. Short motion by Amendola from the left. Brady takes the shotgun snap, stands in, throws it left for Amendola, reaches up and snacks a high throw and lands inside the 10, rolling to the 9. Ball slightly behind him, but Danny makes the grab.